What do you do when you've drifted away from God? You know, God made us to be close to him. But what do you do when you feel far, far away? Today, from the truths of ancient scriptures, I'll answer that question. And we need that ancient answer because what we normally do when we feel far from God is the exact wrong thing to do. You see, our relationship to God, it's similar to other relationships. It's got to be maintained. I mean, that's how relationships work. If you don't maintain them, stuff happens in your relationships you definitely don't want. I read a wedding announcement the other day that said Trenton Casper and Alicia Mays were married on April 20th, 2020. So ends a friendship that began in middle school. Now, we all know what they meant to say, but it illustrates the fact that sometimes what we want in a relationship, it's not what we get. Why is that? Well, it's because relationships change. They're dynamic. They always change. You know, it's impossible for a relationship to be static, to stay the same. Human relationships are always changing. Your relationship to your spouse, to your kids, to your boss, to your friends, those relationships are either getting better and better or they're getting worse and worse. And the same is true of your relationship to God. Your heart is either getting warmer towards God or colder towards God. So, what do you do when it gets cold? What do you do when you feel far from God? Well, the wrong thing to do is what you do naturally. What do you do naturally when you feel a relationship's growing apart? You pretend that those feelings aren't there. You hope that those feelings just go away. But ignoring those feelings never works. In fact, pretending that the relationship is still okay is actually a kiss of death. I'll tell you why in a minute. God says in Hebrews chapter 2 that it's crucial that we keep a firm grip on what we've heard so that we don't drift off. You know, all of us have known Christians who, for some reason, have drifted off in their relationship with Christ. It can happen to anyone. It could happen to you. It could happen to me. We all face the same temptations in our lives, and it's possible for us to drift off. You know, even those early Christians, they struggled with this. In the last book of the Bible, Jesus, he's talking to a church and he says, this is Revelation 2:2, I know your deeds, your hard work and your perseverance. I know that you have persevered and endured hardships for my name and have not grown weary. Now that all sounds great, right? I mean, if that church was getting a report card, I mean, that sounds like straight A's. But then Jesus says this, verse 4, I hold this against you. You have forsaken the love that you had at first. Consider how far you have fallen. I mean, here's an entire church that used to be close to Jesus, but now they're not. The love has gone cold. Let me ask you, has there ever been a time in your life when you were closer to God than you are right now? Yes or no? Let me ask it again. Has there ever been a time in your life when you were closer to God than you are right now? If you're bold, put your answer in the feed. Now, if you answered yes, then today's message is going to be a huge, huge help to you. We're going to look at what to do and how to reignite that relationship and get it fresh. And if you said no, well, I mean, that's awesome. I'm glad that you feel closer to God right now than you've ever been. But I'm going to encourage you, lean in tight today because relationships change. And I'm going to share in just a moment how to keep from drifting away later on in your life, or like tomorrow. Hey, let's get to it. What do you do when your heart gets cold? How do you warm it up again? Well, grab a pen or something, take notes, because in a second, I'm going to give you 3 moves to make when your relationship to God grows cold. The first of which is to admit what caused me to drift away. You know, drifting, it's easy. When I was in my 20s, some friends of mine were up at Folsom Lake in Northern California. It's a huge lake fed by the American River. And we're all just floating in inner tubes, enjoying the California sun. Well, the night before that we went to the lake, I'd stayed up all night studying for a college exam. And that morning, I went to class, took the exam, and then I met my friends at Folsom's main beach. So we tossed our tubes in the water at this little lake spot, and the combination of a warm, sunny day and the soft, rolling waves of the lake had me snoozing in minutes. No big deal, right? No, that day, Folsom's water level was full from the snowmelt of the Sierra Nevadas, and the water management engineers at Folsom Dam decided to release some of that water. So now the lake has water coming in from the north from the river, all headed south out the spillways of the dam. Picture Niagara Falls with an on-off switch. And the switch is now on, which means there's a current. And it's nothing dangerous if you're aware of it. But if you have the kind of friends I had and you fall asleep, well, let's just say when I woke up from my slumber a few hours later, I had drifted nearly a mile out into the center of this massive lake. My friends who thought it was hilarious, they had to get in the car to get me at another beach. Bill's Pointe, if you're watching from the West Coast. Now, question, what did I have to do to drift? Nothing. I was just sleeping, just drifting off. I didn't even notice I was drifting. But all of a sudden, I'm looking around at a place I never thought I'd be. Another hour's sleep, I could have been going over the spillway. Listen, drifting, it always takes you in one direction, away. So what's the first move back? You've got to admit what's caused you to drift away. Now, although drifting is often imperceptible in our lives, that doesn't mean there's not a reason it's happening. Like the current that took me on a tube ride, let me give you 4 of the most common currents that cause you and I to drift away from God. What are those 4 currents? Well, they're all found in the story of a man who was incredibly close to Jesus, a disciple by the name of Peter. Peter, he had this passionate love for Christ. He was near militant about his loyalty to Jesus. But on the night before Jesus was crucified, Peter got swept up in 4 currents. The first of which went down when Peter and the other 11 disciples, they got up from the dinner table, that's the Last Supper, with Jesus, and they head over to the Mount of Olives. And en route, they hear Jesus predict. This is Mark 14:27. Jesus says, "You will all fall away." Remember what Peter says to this? This is verse 29. Peter declared, even if all these other weaklings, all these other half-hearted followers, even if all these other guys fall away, I will not. And Jesus answered, tonight, before the rooster crows twice, you yourself will disown me 3 times. But Peter insisted emphatically, even if I've got to die with you, I will never disown you. What is this first current that pulls us away from God? It's the current of overconfidence. Overconfidence is often the first step in drifting away because, we start to think like toddlers. I can do this my own self. I can put on my own shoes. I can do the Velcro straps. I can handle my problems. I can do my life without you, God. 1 Corinthians 10:12 says, if you think you are strong, be careful not to fall. Proverbs 16:18 says, a proud attitude leads to ruin. The problem is our ego. What is ego? It's edging God out. Slowly but surely, our ego just edges God out. Right out of our lives. We think, my finances, I got this, God. I'll just edge you out. My family, I got this. I'll just edge you out. I can handle that on my own, God. And it's our ego, our overconfidence, that slowly puts us on a drift from God. But doing it all ourselves, it's exhausting. And that leads us to the next current that pulls us away from God. It's in the very next scene as Jesus, he's with his disciples late at night in the Garden of Gethsemane. And this is verse 33. Jesus took Peter, James, and John along with him. And he began to be deeply distressed and troubled. My soul is overwhelmed with sorrow to the point of death, Jesus said to them. Stay here and keep watch. Here's Jesus at one of the most agonizing moments of his humanity. And he knows he's going to be tortured on one of Rome's most excruciating execution devices. He knows the weight of the entire world's sin is going to be placed on his shoulders. He knows that he's going to die the very next day. And so he says to his 3 closest friends, Peter's one of them. He says, Peter, can you support me? Can you stay up with me? I need you, Peter. And if you know the story, you know what's coming next after Jesus wrestles in prayer over his future. Verse 37 says, he returns to his disciples and finds them sleeping. Jesus says, Peter, are you asleep? Couldn't you keep watch 1 hour? This is the second current that causes us to drift away from God. It's the current of laziness. We start to slack off on the good habits that got us our relationship good. It can happen in a friendship. It can happen in a marriage. It can happen with a child or a parent, and it can most definitely happen with God. If I want a good relationship with God, I've got to talk to him regularly through prayer, and I've got to hear back what God says to me through his word, through the Bible, and through messages like this one via church. When I stop doing that, I drift away. Now, let's not be too judgmental of these disciples. They just had a big Passover meal. The lights are out. It's dark. It's late at night. And so what's the human thing to do? It's natural. They fall asleep. But that's the easy thing to do. And doing the right thing, it's not easy. It requires effort. It requires energy. I mean, what's easier, watching a movie or going for a jog? What would you rather do? Friends, it's often difficult to do the right thing. Relationships take work. And Jesus asked Peter to invest in the relationship, to work on it, to help him out, to pray for him. But Peter, he got lazy and went to sleep. And his laziness was a current that led him to drift from Christ. By the way, I'm not picking on Peter. I like Peter. I like that the Bible doesn't tidy up the messy parts of Peter's life. I mean, in the Bible, we don't get the stories of perfect people. We get to see how people, just like us, made mistakes and how God worked in their life anyway. And there's 2 more currents that cause Peter to drift away from God. And we can learn from those. The next is found when Peter starts to worry about what other people think. You see, after Jesus is arrested and taken down into the city for trial, the Bible tells us, this is verse 54, that Peter followed him at a distance. Now, why is Peter following Jesus at a distance? It's because of a fear. And that's our third current. It's the current of ridicule. Jesus had just become unpopular. The crowd had turned against him. So Peter was worried about being grouped in with Jesus, about being put down, about being harassed. And so he just keeps Jesus at a safe distance. Do you try to follow Jesus at a safe distance? Just far enough back that maybe nobody will notice. Maybe you don't want anybody to see a Bible on your desk at work, or maybe when you're home, you pray before a meal, but when you go out to a restaurant, you just skip over grace. You just don't want people to notice it. When I was in 8th grade, my mom took me shopping for clothes for a school dance, and that was no big deal. She was generous. She did that a lot. But this time, we're at the store, and I see some girls from my school, and they're in the store too, but without their moms. And I'm trying to appear like I'm out on my own, but my mom, she's got no idea. She's shouting across the clothes racks, Raymond, hey, what do you think of this shirt? Do you like this color? I wanted to hide in the dressing rooms. And the next day at school, one of the girls came up to me and said, I saw you shopping with your mom yesterday. And I thought, oh boy, here it comes. But what she said next was this: you're lucky. My mom loves to shop, but she'd never even think of taking me. Friends, Proverbs 29:25 says, fearing people is a dangerous trap because you live your life based on what other people think. That girl, she respected the fact my mom took me shopping. She was kind of jealous about it in a way. And the same is true of your faith. People respect your faith much more than you believe they do. So don't create stories in your head that lead you to fear and shame. Jesus said, if anyone is ashamed of me, I'm going to be ashamed of him. What he's saying is that there's no such thing as like a secret agent Christian in God's army. There's no such thing as a secret agent, with a trench coat on and identification inside. And if you're looking, for somebody else and say, well, yeah, I'm one too, but don't tell anyone, right? Then you hide it again. That's not the way it works. We're identified as God's people. That's what it means to follow Jesus. So this desire to follow him at a distance, it can cause us to drift away. Now, there's a fourth cause of drifting from God that you see in Peter's life. Let's go back to verse 54. Remember, Peter followed him at a distance, right into the courtyard of the high priest, and there he sat with the guards, and catch this, he warmed himself at the fire. Think about this for a moment. Peter's not only hanging out in the courtyard with the group that's arrested Jesus, trying to fit in, avoid ridicule, he's also cozied up to the campfire and he's now warming himself. This is the fourth cause of drifting away. It's the current of instant gratification. Jesus, he's being thrust into a courtroom. He's about to be condemned to death. And Peter, one of the guys that had a very close relationship with Jesus, is now sitting down with the enemy and warming himself up at their fire. When I was younger, I'd read that passage and think, wow, there's something really wrong with Peter. How can a guy be so close to Jesus one day and then so far the next? But as I've grown up, I've seen that happen many, many times. Maybe you've seen it too. Someone follows Jesus for years and then they just look at somebody else, who's got a better job or a bigger house or a nicer car, and they think, why don't I have that? I deserve that. I should get that. And it's like this switch happens in their mind. They start to chase some instant gratifications. They start to warm themselves by the fire. You've seen it. I've seen it. Someone has this uber strong faith in Christ, and they've been following him for years, and then they get off track. They chase some instant gratification. Maybe it's money, maybe it's sex, maybe it's some goal that they've got or dream they want to chase. Maybe it's not even some evil thing. It's just something that provides a little ego boost, a little gratification shot. And if that happens to you, I can tell you from seeing it over and over that your behavior nearly always follows a three-step pattern. First, you stop giving. You think, well, I deserve more stuff, and so you cut out giving to get more stuff. Giving, Jesus told us, is one of the number one indicators of our heart. Second, you stop praying. You stop talking to God. Why? Well, when you start doing things you shouldn't be doing, the truth is you don't really want to hear what God has to say at that moment. Third, you stop church. You stop being around other Christians because, church feels more and more uncomfortable. Some of you watching right now might be right at the edge of this third step. But listen, God has you watching right now to say to you, I love you. I've got more joy for you than the world could ever offer. Stop the drift and come back to me. I made you to be close to me. Come. So, move number one that we need to make is to admit what current has pulled us away from God. Is it overconfidence, laziness, ridicule, instant gratification, or is it something else? The drifting won't stop until we identify why it started. Now, what's the second move you need to make? Well, it's to remember what God tells us in Isaiah 30:18. The Lord longs to be gracious to you. Many of us think that God is up in heaven just waiting, for us to make a mistake so he can zap us, right? That verse says that's not true at all. God longs to be gracious to you. So this is the second move. Realize God wants me back. Now, once you've admitted what's caused the drift in your life, and once you've realized God wants you back, I hope the third step's obvious. It's to return to God immediately. Don't wait. Don't delay. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 15 says, today, if you hear God's voice speaking to you, do not harden your heart. No matter what you've done, go back to your relationship with God immediately. Isaiah 1:19 says, no matter how deep the stain of your sins, God says, I can take it out and make you clean as freshly fallen snow. I know some of you may be thinking, well, return to God, Ray? Really? I've messed up my life so much. There's no way back. There's such a mess in my life. It feels so complicated, so complex to try to get back to him. Listen, no matter how messed up your life has become, no matter how long it's been, no matter how far from God you feel right now, it's only one step back. The boys and I, we were up in Michigan last summer, and we went to this competitive escape room in St. Joe. It looked like two jail cells. Ethan and I, we went into one cell. Trevor and Spencer went into the other. Two rooms, side by side, exactly the same. And the task was to be the first guys to break out of jail. Well, it was not an easy escape room. We were in there like forever because in each room, they had installed one of those ancient Chinese puzzle boxes, which meant you not only needed to find a key somewhere in the room, right? You also had to figure out how to move the wooden pieces on the puzzle box to reveal the lock. It was intricate. They locked us in on a Friday night in May, and it was like 2 months later before Ethan and I made our way out. I think Trevor and Spencer are still up there. Kidding. But that escape room, that Chinese box, if you didn't know just the right movements, You couldn't even get the key into the lock to unlock it. And of course, once you got into the box, you still had to use the clue in the box to find your way out of the jail cell. It was so complicated. And I think, friends, that many times it feels that way in our relationship with God. We think, if I just knew the right little movement, just the right little intricate religious things to do, then maybe somehow, some way I could get back into a relationship with God. Listen, there's only one thing that needs to be done. And here's the incredible part. The one thing that needs to be done, it's already been done. It's not a lot of intricate movements by you. It's the one thing God did. One movement. Jesus stretched out his arms and he died. And he gave his life for you. And that moment said, as loudly as Jesus could possibly say it, I love you. Jesus said it so that you could hear that above whatever complexity or confusion there is in your life. He wants you to hear, I love you. No matter how far you've gotten from him, no matter how distant you feel from him, Jesus wanted you to hear him say, I love you. Why? So you would know that it's only one step back to him. Do you know, God says in Jeremiah 15:19, if you return to me, I'll restore you so you can continue to serve me. You know, there's a happy ending to the story of Peter. Peter returns to God, and God uses Peter to launch this incredible thing called the church. And he gave him the ability to preach and to serve him in brand new ways that Peter had never had before. In fact, 2 of the books of the Bible were written by Peter. And the Gospel of Mark, it's really just Peter's stories written down by Mark. See, Jesus, he did 2 things. He gave Peter 2 significant moments that helped Peter come back to God. The first occurred on the day of the resurrection. Jesus, he meets with the women who had been at the tomb, and he tells the ladies, let the disciples know I'm alive. But the way that Jesus tells them that contained a very significant phrase. Jesus says, go tell the disciples and Peter that I'm alive. Why did he include Peter's name separately and individually? Because Jesus wanted to make sure that Peter didn't feel left out. Jesus wanted Peter to know that his denial, his huge drift away, did not mean he was no longer a disciple. So Jesus included him by name. Maybe you need to hear God say your name today in your heart, to realize God cares about you and wants you back. The second amazing moment comes when Peter is sitting on the shore of the Sea of Galilee with Jesus, and Jesus looks Peter right in the eyes and says to him, Peter, do you love me? You remember, Peter had denied Jesus 3 times as he drifted away. So 3 times, Jesus gives Peter opportunities to return to him, to say, yes, I love you, Jesus, and to reaffirm his faith and get back close to him. Friends, today, God is giving you an opportunity. It's no accident you're watching this message right now. God is saying to you today, I want you to come back to me. I want to restore your faith, your joy, and the intimacy of our relationship. Sure, you've drifted away, but I want you back. Come back to me today. It's like the story of Kevin and Faith, who were honeymooning in the Adirondack Mountains. They were paddling together out in a mountain lake in a canoe when Faith let her hand just slip into the water to just drift for a while. And when she let her hand down into the water, her wedding ring slipped off her finger and fell deep into the waters of the lake. Her kind-hearted, strong new husband did exactly the right thing. He dove again and again and again into that lake trying to find that ring, but he could never find it. After diving all afternoon, he said to his wife, I'll buy you a new one, honey. But like most newlywed women, Faith said, I don't want a new one. I want the one you put on my finger. 20 years later, at the same lake, vacationing with their children this time, Kevin and his son go out fishing. And Kevin hooks a large trout for dinner. And as Faith cleaned the fish, she found her wedding ring inside it. True story. I share that story for 2 reasons. First, to remind you that nothing becomes so lost that it cannot be found. Not in God's realm. You are never so lost that God cannot find you. But here's the second reason I share that story. I think many of us feel like God finding us would be like winning some kind of lottery. It might happen to 1 or 2 people, but it's never going to happen to me. But here's where the wedding ring story and your story don't connect. In the story, it's a ring that's lost, and the ring can't find itself. But in your story, your life, you're the one who's lost. And that's the key, because you're not some ring that can't find its owner. You know who the owner is. You know where he is. You're not lying in the silt at the bottom of some lake while someone's diving to find you. You can make the decision to stop the drift and come back to God. You can decide right now. Maybe today you're feeling far, far from God. You can decide right now to come home to Christ. You can. Or maybe you're thinking, well, I'm not that far away. I'm not where I should be, but I don't think I've drifted off very far. Listen, that's a very dangerous thought. Once you allow yourself to believe the lie that you've only drifted off a bit from God, you'll soon end up miles apart. Wherever you are right now, come home to Christ today. Drifting, it's gradual, but restoration, it's immediate. Let me pray for you. Father, I know from my own personal experience that sometimes there's this distance that arises in a relationship, and sometimes it's in my relationship to you. And you feel so far away, but it's not because you've moved. It's because I've drifted away. And God, for every person watching today who has had that same feeling I've had, God, I pray that you would help them see what current has caused them to move far from you, and to admit it, and then to realize the whole time you want them back. And God, I pray, and I know many others are praying right now as well, that you, God, would help them to decide today to reignite that relationship, to know it's just one step back. It's just to realize and turn back to you and desire that relationship. Thank you, God, for moving like that. Now, let me invite you to pray. You can talk to God silently right now in your home or wherever you're watching. Say, God, I'm coming home to you. I'm putting my faith and my trust in you. Forgive the wrong things I've done. Guide me, lead me, bring me close to you, God. Restore to me the joy of my salvation. And friends, if you've never started a relationship with God, tell him, hey, God, I trust you. I believe you sent Jesus to die for me. I accept your forgiveness. I commit my life for you. Come close to me. Friends, if you prayed that prayer, would you hit the like button right now so we can celebrate it with you? Hit the like button. And if you want to be sure that you get notices of whenever we have teaching or worship to share with you, hit the subscribe button so we can touch base with you. Well, hey, thanks, friends, for sharing this time together, for leaning in and growing in your relationship with God. I love you. God has a plan for you. And as he grows you, I'm so excited to see then how God will use you to help other people find and follow Jesus. Thank you for the way that you're diving in right now and for the way that you're giving and supporting the mission of your church. I'll see you soon.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching. I would love for you to go ahead and like and subscribe to this channel. We want to make sure that we're staying connected with you and that you're staying connected with us. We go live every Sunday at 9, 10:15, and 11:30. So again, go ahead, like and subscribe to stay connected. I'll see you soon.